In December last year, 2 school students presented a petition to Parliament with 12,000 signatures calling for a day to commemorate the New Zealand land wars. What soon became obvious in the media debate that followed was that very few of us know much at all about these wars fought on and for our own land. As Barack Obama said recently, in politics and in life, ignorance is not a virtue. Yet New Zealand is one of the few countries in the world to teach so little about its own history. Tamsin Hanley is a school teacher who saw a desperate need for a comprehensive history that teachers could draw from to educate young New Zealanders. She mortgaged her house to research and produce the critical guide to Māori and Pākehā histories of Aotearoa while teaching at Auckland Central Primary School here in Auckland. Written to cover 200 years of accurate history from both the Pākehā and Māori perspective, these books draw from the work produced by our best historians and give a balanced history up to the present day. There are copies available for purchase at the back, and Auckland Libraries has purchased copies of each of these books, which you can request downstairs if you like. To tell us more about this fantastic resource, it's our pleasure to welcome Tamsin Hanley.
He mihi nui tēnei ki ngā mati, he mihi hoki ki ngā maunga, he mihi nui ki ngā moana, he mihi ki ngā marae, he mihi ki ngā iwi, he mihi hoki ki te wharenei, he mihi hoki ki a koe te katoa e te whānau o kai mai ki mihi kara o te kūnei. Ki te kai mihi o Bella, he mihi ki a koe hoki. Thank you very much for asking me to come tonight and for the library for hosting this. Okay, I'm going to stand over here now. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a pretty crazy night out there. For those of you who don't know me, I'm going to, what we've been working on, I'm going to do a PowerPoint to explain the history of this curriculum program resource, which I call CPR for short, because it's a long name, and so you can learn about how it works. The 6 books totally titled A Critical Guide to Māori and Pākehā Histories, because it's a bit of a beginner's guide for dummies of Māori and Pākehā histories. I include myself in this and being a dummy of someone who didn't know about those histories when I started. I've designed a professional kind of package development of this resource for educators across all sectors. So this is for primary school teachers and secondary and early childhood. So a bit of my background: I'm Pākehā, went to mainstream schools my whole life and loved school, loved learning. When I left school, I realised that I hadn't learned anything about things Māori. I didn't know about the treaty, I didn't know about accurate histories of this country, and I certainly didn't know about being Pākehā either. And so my school had taught me information that I needed to know as a citizen to be actively informed and participate in an actively informed kind of way as a citizen of the nation. And so I was pretty angry about that when I was 18, and so I made a decision to go off and start to become, to learn about things Māori, and to learn accurate histories, and to learn about being Pākehā on that journey, and also to learn about the Treaty of Waitangi. So when I started learning, I'm still learning those, still on that journey. Then I decided I wanted to become a teacher so that I could teach this content, particularly to students, so that they wouldn't have to go through what I'd gone through, where you grow up and you don't know all this, how to interact with particular issues that are going, contemporary issues that are going on in your country at the time. So when I went to Teachers Training College, they said to me that you can't teach New Zealand history. They said it's too hard and you can't teach the treaty to young people, it's too hard, and all those things they told me. So basically I didn't believe them, and I have successfully taught that history for about 25 years in mainstream education in this country, and also in Māori pathways in education in this country. And I've done those, that content. I've also consulted with teachers from level 6 to 8, so that's secondary and early childhood teachers. And everything that I've done is completely sort of within the New Zealand curriculum, as you'll see. So this sort of work that I was doing over 25 years, led to a master's that I completed in 2007, which was asking, were primary school teachers actually teaching accurate New Zealand histories? And I found lots of findings, but the ones that are really important in this story is that most of the teachers only knew, they knew no history at all, or they only knew a sort of standard story version of history, a kind of colonial version of New Zealand history, and which meant that a lot of teachers were still teaching really racist and stereotypical histories. Also, a lot of our teachers feel still are very monocultural about things Māori, and they didn't have that knowledge either, and so that meant that they were unable to kind of present new ways of talking about Māori and Pākehā with their students. They also tended to avoid anything that they thought was controversial, and they had a belief system that you couldn't teach this content to young people. They also had a strong, and my findings were that the teachers were really desperate to teach this material. They really want to do it, they're really keen to do this, but they just don't know how. They need resources and they need guidance. So other research confirmed my findings, and so based on that, I went back to my school at the time, which was Newton Central Primary School. So, and I asked the school if I could teach, if I could write a curriculum that would teach this information to our staff. And they agreed to, and that's been successfully in operation since 2009. All the photos in those 6 books now, at the end result, are from 20 years' work at Newton Central. I just want to clarify what I mean by a standard story of history. It's our sort of common sense version of history of New Zealand, and standard stories, what they do is they use particular ways of speaking about things to ensure that the histories of our contemporary problems are seen as unavoidable, and all of our society's resources are used to legitimate this story. The standard story is presented as an accurate account, and when we find it isn't. And they sort of sustain our amnesia about what's actually happened in this country. And the standard stories result in these sorts of ideas still being believed in, and they're still even being taught by our teachers, educators. And yet what we know now is that these are not accurate ideas. I was raised with these, and many teachers are still teaching from those ideas because they don't have any alternatives. So it's sort of not our fault that we don't know our accurate histories. That is part of the colonisation process, really, is to ensure that we don't know. And that keeps us being pretty inactive and around it. So the same year as my MA was being written, the New Zealand curriculum was published, and It's got some potentially worthy goals, and particularly this one. The Ministry of Education wanted all educators to enact this thing called a treaty principle. And treaty principle is something like this, that I sort of think that it's about that we want to produce a wide ethnic citizenry, that means lots of ethnicities in this country, that is knowledgeable about Māori things and Pākehā things, as well as about the treaty. And I sort of, from my research and other research, I knew that educators couldn't meet those aims, knowing what we know that educators don't know. So I thought that it might be more possible to achieve the aims if teachers had that knowledge and some pedagogies around how to teach it. So the next thing I looked at was what sort of resources the ministry were sort of putting out to support teachers to meet this wonderful treaty principle that we need to meet. So basically there are absolutely minimal ministry teachers or student resources at a primary level to teach this content, and these three older units here, they have completely out of date and inaccurate histories in them, and yet they're still in schools being used. In 2012, the ministry published this thing called the Update, which is gave teachers some ideas about how to tick off their little treaty principle. But the content has pretty uncritical ideas. For example, it guides teachers to study European migrant ships, but it doesn't talk about the English class system. It says you can tick, if you do kapahaka, then you can tick off your treaty principle, but it doesn't give you activities for how to deal with racism that's active in your classroom or in your staff room. It encourages you to study people like Māori people like Te Whiti, who was a Māori pacifist in the 1870s, and this ministry kind of encouraged us to do Te Whiti because he seemed to be a good Māori person. We're not encouraged to kind of study Māori people who liked cruelty or te rauparaha or te whit or hungihika, who are seen to be, too violent still by our kind of government. 2014, this one here, the Māori Histories curriculum was published, and it's about 50 times better than what we've had. And it's a great kind of relief and improvement, but it still is asking educators to teach about local tribal Māori history, which is really important, but when these teachers don't actually understand their own histories of colonisation and how the local iwi history actually connects with colonisation, and so as a result of that, a lot of teachers aren't touching the new Māori Histories curriculum because it's just too out of their league for them. Teachers can use non-state provided texts like these ones, which are really useful, but they generally only cover one historical kind of period, when in fact, if you, when you're trying to enact a treaty principle, you have to have a much wider context than just one historical period. And also, none of these resources actually deal with the Māori treaty text and the English version, which if you're trying to enact a treaty principle, then you actually have to know about that. So it's something that isn't covered in there. And also, secondary has secondary has a couple of really good ones, but one's completely they won't print it anymore. So you can't even at secondary school. The best one you can't even get anymore. And early childhood has got no resources except one that's just a Māori language one that came out just this week. So we'll wait and see how that goes. So basically there's absolutely minimal stuff there. So the primary social studies achievement objectives of the New Zealand curriculum was like seeing the next most obvious place for me to go and look for guidance about how to meet these curriculum treaty aims that I was supposed to be doing, but that's not the case. They're so generic that they counter any possibility for the production of the citizenry that the ministry says that it wants us to produce, let alone the state actually teaching citizens accurate national histories. Because teachers can avoid doing anything controversial and or that they don't know about. And teachers will tend to still do topics like the warm fuzzy topics like matariki. We all know matariki and lots of people really happy doing matariki, but they won't necessarily do a study on this foreshore and seabed issue. The curriculum uses the word tangata whenua, which is really awesome because in past curriculums they haven't used it. So now we've got the word tangata whenua in the curriculum, which is great. But the New Zealand curriculum doesn't use the word Pākehā, so it doesn't. It's the whole the Pākehā group in the story isn't in the national curriculum. It's not there. So there's this whole group of people who don't exist in there. It covers British migrations, but it doesn't use the word colonisation for the entire curriculum. It's not mentioned, the word colonisation. And so you're kind of encouraged to be doing Anzac war parades still, but you're not, as you know, if you've been listening to the news, you're not mentioned. The New Zealand land wars are not mentioned. So it was just basically it's pretty bad. It's not till secondary school at 13 years old that students are believed to be able to understand how the treaty is responded differently by different people. But that's only if the student has chosen to do history, and it's only if the teacher of that student chooses to teach the treaty paper in that. So basically, for the first 8 years of primary schooling in this country, there's not one mention of the treaty, or the two peoples that created it, or what happened afterwards. So there's a bit of a tad missing there. And then it gets worse. Dr. Mark Sheehan, he's at Victoria. His research was on secondary school teachers, and he confirmed that trend continues in secondary level history teaching. So you get a complete absence of Māori dimension in the secondary programs. Again, they won't cover colonisation and they choose safe topics. Our students tend to know more about, Princess Kate and Prince Harry and William than they do about the Māori kingitanga or the Māori King movement. So, we've got the Māori King movement's been going in this country since 1860, and it's just down the road in Hamilton, and yet I've grown up my whole life not knowing about it. And so this is what is happening with our children still today. So basically there's no coherent coverage across the nation, across all our curriculums. Most nations in the world teach their histories, and we do not. And yet these are our stories, all our good stories and all our hard ones. Sheehan says that to do this, teachers need to understand how colonisation works, and they need to be able to make connections from the past and the present, and they also need to be able to read up-to-date literature. And that requires sort of a bit of professional development, but the Ministry of Education isn't providing any PD or in that area. There is excellent research literature available that can help teachers to update their literature. But according to the research, it's completely unlikely that teachers have access to the work, or had time to read it, or made it available to their students. also the level at which much of the modern research and argument is pitched at is not appropriate for school level students. So those wonderful texts, which are so enormously rich, teachers don't have time to read them and they're too hard to read. So they need translation into secondary and primary level resource material. So given this sort of information, then for me, thinking about designing a critical curriculum program, I decided that if I was going to do this curriculum, it had to include these things. It had to have knowledge of Indigenous and settler politics. It had to address teacher knowledge gaps. And it had to have pedagogies about how to teach controversial topics like racism, sexism, class and colonisation. It had to have translate those authoritative history texts down to school levels, and it also had to include Indigenous and settler content in it. I'm also saying it had to have all three treaty texts, and I'll explain that in a minute what I mean by that, and honouring the treaty discourse. So that's and honouring the treaty discourse comes from the treaty education movement, where they, when they're doing their treaty education and they training people, they use an honouring the treaty discourse. So I felt that needed to be part of this as a resource for our educators. And it also had to be able to update a new migrant person who was just fresh off the boat. I've got, I have new, Muslim migrant students at the moment that I'm training to be teachers in this country, and so they need to be able to pick up this book and read basic kind of guides to Māori and Pākehā histories, but it also needs to be able to update long in the tooth experienced teachers such as myself, Māori and Pākehā, because there's lots of Māori people who don't know these histories as well out there, and they need to know them as well as and Pākehā people. So the resource is being written for all those people, and that this curriculum should be normal coverage for all people in this country. So basically, based on the first version, based on the first version at Newton, I designed this critical curriculum program resource, which does address research findings and includes all the aspects on the last slide. It also meets all various curriculum goals and can be used by mainstream and as well as Māori pathways in this country, and it can be professional development for secondary, primary and early childhood. And it can be integrated across curriculum as well. So the content in the books is divided into 6 topics, and which each have a professional development unit booklet for educators to professionally read. So those are the 6 books that you've seen out there on the table. So this is the 6 topics are shown in this overview, and I just want to explain what they cover because it's really important. The content is really important to understanding how it works. So first of all, Unit 1 or Book 1, Te Ao Māori o Nihiwa, is like a basic basic Māori worldviews. So it starts with the origin story, and then is set in the Pacific, and then how Māori people deliberately left the Pacific to come and explore and then discover this country. They discovered Aotearoa and began to settle this place as tangata whenua communities. So that's all in that period, and basic Māori worldviews, for people who don't know about them. Then in the book 2, it goes to Europe, to British Isles, and then it does the same thing. So it's got basic European worldviews, It starts from the Celts 50 BC, and then it goes through colonisation and Christianity, the monarchy, the class system, the Magna Carta, and then European ideas of superiority, and then Tasman and Cook, and how they didn't discover this country. That's written in there, and which is still being taught out there. I heard that on the news about 2 weeks ago, that they said that Cook discovered this country, still saying that. So basically in this resource, it basically says, it really acknowledges the importance of Tasman and Cook in our stories, but that they were visitors. They didn't discover this country because Māori people were already living here. So then it's after that goes to the 19th century, and it has industrialisation and the poverty and the famines in Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales, and then leading to immigration to Aotearoa. So basic European worldviews, because when the early Celts started, when they were beginning, they were very similar to pre-Celtic Māori, where they had communal land and communal gods and all those same things, similar things. But when Christianity came along, and the monarchy, and the class system, and then you had the end of communal land happened, and individual land and land enclosure became really critical, and that's why these early migrants, for them, owning land was why it was so important to them at that period in our histories. So basically then in Unit 3, these two worlds meet. Now, when they meet each other, they name each other Māori and Pākehā. That's when the first time that those terms come into usage. The word Māori was in existence without a capital M, but the word Māori, meaning that people with a capital M, came into existence in those early encounter periods. And also the term Pākehā is explained in that it isn't a terrible word, and it's actually got this amazing history, and that it's a very important word in this country, because it comes from the Indigenous people, and it comes from the Indigenous language, and so it really locates us here. So that's all unpacked in that one. And then after that, both Māori and Pākehā in those early encounter period were really agentically engaging with each other through various agendas like sealers, whalers, and la traders. But Māori were particularly interested in, and this is often what we don't know about, I found this out myself, is that Māori were particularly interested in literacy. They wanted to know how to read and write in Māori and how to read and write in English. And so they were seeking that out in the 1820s. They was going and seeking out Pākehā people to come and live in their villages so that they could do that and trade with them. So this was going on, and then because there was some Pākehā people there misbehaving in 1830, there was some misbehaviour happening with the sealers and whalers and prostitution and all those things, the ungodly kind of histories that went on up there and around the place, around the country. So in 1835, Māori decided to write a thing called a Declaration of Independence, and they wrote this in Māori, and basically what it asked for was, it said, can you please send a Pākehā person to come over and look after your Pākehā people because they're not behaving themselves, and they also said, we are the chiefs of this land, and we are the sovereign chiefs of this land. And the letter went over to England, and the King of England had the letter gazetted and had it and acknowledged it in the colonial office. So they acknowledged that Māori were the sovereign chiefs of this country. Now, because of that, that meant that because of that recognition, it meant that Britain couldn't come over and colonise here or just take over. They had, because they'd already acknowledged them as sovereign group. So they had to think that's how the idea of a treaty came into existence. So basically, the idea of a treaty came into existence to propose a treaty to this Māori, two Māori chiefs to talk about, to deal with this behaviour and the conflicts that were going on at the time. So that was 5 years before the treaty. So then in Unit 4, Book 4, it mentions making agreements and honouring agreements. Then it talks about the pro and anti reasons both on the Māori and Pākehā sides for this idea of a treaty. And there were lots of complex reasons, of course. And so then it goes into the actual writing of the Māori text and how the Māori text was written and how it was debated and how it was agreed to and how it was signed by two sovereign groups and in 1840. So and then the resource uses an English literal translation of the Māori text to unpack the 3 articles in the Māori text in Māori of the rights and responsibilities of both sovereign groups, which basically were in Article 1, Māori allowed Pākehā to come and live here, some Pākehā to come and live here to look after their own people and and have engagement with them on Māori terms basically. And then in Article 2, ensured Māori sovereignty, continued with them and their resources. And then Article 3, also in Article 2 of the treaty is Māori agreed that if they chose to sell land, that they would only sell land to England. They wouldn't sell land to France and America and other people that were trying to buy it off them. That they would only sell to England. And in the 3rd article, they got British citizenship rights. So that's using the English translation. So basically then it covers how slightly later, an English version of the treaty came into existence. And in the English version, and I haven't got time tonight to tell you how it is, but it was a really interesting story, and it's in there, in the books of how that English version actually came into being, and that's an amazing story. But anyway, can tell you over a cup of tea later. That in the English version, the Article 1 basically said had a different article in it. It said this. It said, is that mic being off the whole time? Oh no. It said that in Article 1 said that Māori ceded their entire sovereignty and gave it over to the English Queen, just like that. So now we know that actually, and we know now from the historians that didn't happen. That really, really, really didn't happen. So, and too complex to go into tonight, but that the English version wasn't the version that the two sovereign groups signed. And so basically it then covers how for 180 years the Māori community and the Pākehā community had basically followed the other treaty texts for 180 years. And because, and that kind of explains why you get Māori and Pākehā on different planets when it comes to the treaty issues today, because a lot of Māori people are still waiting for the actual treaty to be honoured, and a lot of Pākehā people like myself didn't even know that this Māori version, a Māori text exists, and that it takes precedence in law. And it's in 1840 law as well as today law. The Māori text is the version that has precedence in law. So basically that's quite a big faux pas that we've had in our history that we don't know about and that we're still very unknowledgeable about, and that we need to kind of get knowledgeable about if we want to teach our children about those things. For example, even Te Papa, our national museum, today only puts up the Māori text and then the English version. It doesn't have an English literal translation of the Māori version of the treaty text, and so basically this national museum, which is informing us as a nation as well as all our migrants who come here, basically, if you can't read Māori, which most of us can't, then they just read the English version, and they're basically getting taught again that Māori just handed over their sovereignty when they certainly didn't. So that's what's happening in our even in our national museums, still going on. So Unit 5 then looks at has a little bit of a look at what the difference between tikanga Māori, tikanga and Pākehā law, and then it looks at how that the Pākehā community, from using the English version that came into existence, they used Pākehā law to transgress certain agreements in the treaty, and how what that meant over a period of time was over 180 years. That's meant that a transfer from a very strong, historically a very strong Māori resource base to now, generally speaking, a very strong kind of Pākehā resource base in this country. That's why we've got those kind of statistics today, is because of those kind of laws and what happened in them. So it has those. It also in that in Unit 5 it also says it questions: do we want to keep having the standard story, which is inaccurate, or do we want to use a story which is more accurate? And then it's got one section which unpacks Pākehā culture, which is really an important part of this CPR, is that a lot of us in this country are really uncomfortable with the word Pākehā, so it sort of unpacks what is a Kiwi, what's a New Zealander, what's a Pākehā, what's a European, what's the difference between all those things. And what is a New Zealander and how we're going to be New Zealand, so that unpacks all that, but in a very positive way about being Pākehā. And then it also looks at it has a section of Pākehā history in this country, of all the amazing things that Pākehā people have done in this country, like setting up the welfare state system, and all those wonderful things that we've done in this country are all in there as well. So Unit 5 has incredible stories and incredible people that we sort of are unpacked in there. In Unit 6 is the last book, because it has 180 years of basically from 1820s right till today, till the TPPA, up till now, from 1820s, that Māori people have been taking action since the 1820s to try and ensure their sovereignty in this country, and they're still doing that today. And basically since 1860 there have been non-violent protests in this country. So again, those incredible stories, incredible histories, and yet most of us don't know those stories. I didn't know any of them. And so basically this is a beginner's guide. If you don't know anything about the kohanga movement, you can look up the kohanga movement and see some history on it, and then there's some activities around that. So that's kind of Unit 6. Ka pai? You all okay? Are you breathing? You okay? The reason that the kind of rationale for doing this overview is kind of that if as educators in this country we're asking our students to be able to discuss current events, say for example the TPPA or water rights, or should we be oil drilling, those sort of issues that are coming up in our current day at the moment, then students really have to understand the agreements that were made in the treaty, in the Māori text in the 1840. But before they can understand those, they actually have to understand pre-encounter Māori and Pākehā worldviews. So they really need to understand, before they can understand this, they have to know that Māori people, how they viewed the earth called Papatūānuku, was really different to how European people in the 19th century viewed the earth. Very different, not better or worse, just different. And also that Māori worldviews, when they meet each other, about not being able to own land, that you belonged to land, and that your job was to caretake for land. Whereas Pākehā, in a Pākehā worldview, we can own land. We can own land. And so that those, again, not right or wrong or better or worse, but that these ideas are both really important in our stories. and that you can't really understand, a current event without understanding those treaty issues, and you can't understand the treaty ones without knowing those basic, worldviews. So then, going on to the books, carrying on from the books, inside the books then is each of the booklets are broken into historical sections of that breakdown of that historical period, and so that is for educators to read. It has core information on it, on each historical time section, and the core information has updated information and new ideas. So the following slide is one tiny example from Unit 2, British Isles, and if I'd like you to have a read of it, and then I'll just talk about it. So this is the kind of information that the educators or people can read when they read the books. Basically, it's presenting new information and challenging old ideas about, say, Māori savages and Māori cannibals. And it presents, the CPR has modified retellings of these historical events, and they present Māori positions in this historical tellings that have been absent in the past. So in this case, it's reminding educators that Europeans explorers' tellings of their conflicts with Māori that I grew up with presented this sort of imperialist worldview of that period, and that the Māori practice of whāngai hou was not located within a Māori context of that period. And that's not to teach children about whāngai hou, but it is to teach the teachers. It's to inform teachers about it. So it's to address teacher stereotypes if they're teaching, for example, the Cook period or the pre-encounter Māori period, and they come across students who say to them, "Oh, but Māori were cannibals," or a resource that says that, which I've seen too, and I've heard children in a class, year 6 class this year saying that to me. That teachers can then at least answer in an informed way that the English word term cannibals is not really an accurate definition of that Māori activity. The English word cannibals has a whole lot of connotations that goes with it. That's sort of inaccurate for the term to use for the Māori activity once you learn about whāngai hou. So you see what I mean? So this is it's definitely about educating teachers about these stereotypes so that then they can educate their own, students in more accurate information. If you understand what those things are. Now, after that core information in the book, then the next thing that comes is a range of junior and senior activity possibilities. Now, so this is presented for educators, and all the images, as I said, are from Newton Central. None of the activities are compulsory. So this slide has some photos that covers from Unit 1 and Te Ao Māori o Nehira, and covers basic Māori knowledge that's sort of important to know if you live in this country. This Indigenous knowledge ought to be kind of normal curriculum, I'm suggesting, in this country for all of our educators and our students, such as Māori notions about things called tapu and noa, and Māori worldviews about bodies. And so in these photos, the junior students are creating hine ahone up here. Hine ahone was the first Māori woman to be created by the gods in the origin story. And so these are our juniors who are creating hine ahone in the sand tray on little, our little 5-year-olds and our under 5-year-olds. And you can see this one next to it, this little junior, she's got all her pubic hairs and she's got no clothes on. This is a 5-year-old doing this. And all that stuff coming out her nose is not snot, it's actually when Tani did the sneeze of life on her, and she's a Tihei Mauiora and had the sneeze of life, so that's what that is coming out, who knows. So they've really done an in-depth kind of study into that. Our slightly older children are in male and female groups, and they're doing body parts in Māori and Pākehā, and then our secondary school students can be doing the whole entire body systems in Māori and Pākehā, doing those things. So all the next few slides show photos and activities that match secondary achievement standards as well as these primary images. But in Unit 2, the British Isles, is the activities discussing like social classes in Britain, but also in Aotearoa, because our children do actually understand about poor people and rich people. They do. They already have ideas about that in their heads. So it's really cool to be having those conversations with our students, you know, to be able to talk about those. The children's images down here might be a bit hard to see, but their images of poor houses were really dark and sad and really dim, and everyone's really sad, and then the rich houses are really happy and they've got sunshine and they've all got swimming pools. See, rich people have swimming pools. And so the teacher can really unpack those concepts further about, you know, rich and poor, and unpack those in a more uncritical ways than the ones that our kids have given us. Also, the CPR will unpack positions of the not main characters. So when I grew up, I only heard about young Nick and how he saw the country first. And in fact, that isn't what quite happened. He was the first English person to see that coast, but of course it had been discovered before, but by Māori. But there were also two Ngāti Rongwhakaata boys who were kidnapped temporarily by Cook in that same journey, and their story is really interesting. And also Taiata, who was Tupaia's Tahitian attendant, who Tupaia was one of the Tahitian man who came with Cook and actually basically allowed Cook to survive that journey, we think now. He was so important in his relations with Māori. Anyway, there's a whole lot of stories about them as well, which we don't know about, and yet our children should know about those. Then in Unit 3 is, we've been raised on very inaccurate historical information about the first missionary arrival here, and Māori mock war dances, which Māori don't do mock war dances, we know now that, and also the first missionary sermons and supposed first kind of conversions. When I grew up, I learned that when missionaries, people came here, that Māori just rolled over and converted themselves and just lay down on the grass and gave themselves to the Christians. That's what I learned. But in fact, we know that actually didn't happen at all. And so these activities unpack more accurate events of particularly by Ruatara, who was one of the Māori men who brought his first literacy teacher over to live in his village and a political hui with his people, about the first group of Pākehā people in the country in history to stay in Ruatara's village on his terms as his literacy teacher. That's kind of what the other side of the story of what happened to the conversion story. So then Unit 4 has activities about unpacking the Māori text and the English version, as I said. It's also got activities around how to personify both texts and their feelings on their life's journey, because the Māori text and the English version went through in their lives some terrible things, and also went through some of these wonderful experiences themselves. And so personifying the two versions in text with the children and their feelings on that, you know, how would they feel when they got drowned and when they got eaten by rats and they got ignored and nullified and all those awful things. In Unit 5 has activities on getting students to learn about early Pākehā survival. These ones, look, incredible Pākehā survival. These ones show Pākehā laws This is a timeline of Pākehā in the back of the classroom. So they've done that over 10 weeks, looking at different laws. This is in a primary school classroom. And then also organising a Pākehā Cultural Day. You know how we think that Pākehā culture doesn't really exist? Because there's that belief out there that Pākehā culture doesn't exist, but actually it does. And so having a Pākehā Culture Day and starting up a Pākehā Culture Club, which we did. So, when you go to the cultural festivals, they have the Māori festival, and they've got the PIs, all the Pacifica groups, and they've got they usually have Scottish and Irish, but they don't have a Pākehā group. So we started up a Pākehā Culture Club, and this is our costume that we designed, which had an iron, working person's uniform, because work was so important to Pākehā culture. So that's just examples of that. Unpacking again what is Pākehā and European New Zealanders. And then here in Unit 6, again, this chronological overview of Māori responses. Students can select from one to do an inquiry project on them and then share them back to the class, and then they can learn about 30 different events, or it might be in a junior class might decide to do just study Princess Tapuia. Do you know Princess Tapuia? She's the princess from the Kingitanga movement, a really important, precious princess person in our country. Also, you might just study one movement or one person or one event for a whole 10 weeks. The important thing is that the teacher has read the core information, and then they've read the activity possibilities before they go away and plan. After all the activity ideas and all the fun stuff with all the pictures and everything, all the good fun stuff, at the end of every section, you don't have to read that, I'll just talk to it. At the end of every section is websites which are live on our webpage, and then that are relevant to that section. Then there's references, which are all from the National Library, and we haven't compiled fiction because it's too much, but we expect teachers to include fiction in all their work. The copies, there are copies of the CPR in the National Library, and there are 14 copies in the public libraries now, and the Auckland University has 2 copies. Every unit at the end of the book has this thing of it's an optional integrated cross-curriculum term overview for ideas. Now, if you're a teacher, this is one of the ways that you do planning, but it shows that you don't just have to do social studies with this book, with these books. You can do your maths, you can do your visual language, you can do your science, you can do your health, all out of that same book. So it's kind of cross-curriculum. And this next few slides, you don't have to read them, I'll just explain them. So in the CPR, I've deliberately not provided units of planning or lessons or black masters or assessments. And the reason that I've done that is because I believe it's a teacher's craft to actually professionally develop themselves. Our job is to read and then resource ourselves and then start designing our material accordingly. And so in the CPR, the schools and educators design their own teaching, what they will teach, but from reading the units they've been exposed to updated knowledge, ideas and pedagogy about their local content. This is an example of a Year 2 planning, and she in her plans, the teacher's discourse, the way she's speaking is changing. She's using language that in thinking and resources that she did not use before reading the CPR, and it's not language that comes from the New Zealand curriculum. So it's already showing that from her reading the material, she's starting to shift in her thinking, and that's coming out in her work. Similarly, in this secondary one, is a level 5 planning of a unit called the Terrorism Suppression Act, which showing a teacher using local content from book 6 to match appropriate achievement standards. So it exposes a long history of protest in Aotearoa, which are not acts of terrorism, but then looks at actual terrorist acts and so on. And for those secondary teachers who can't teach the content, they can actually do appraisals on it in their schools. Schools can also, teachers will create their own resources, and when they do create them, there's also evidence of changed language that they're using. For example, in this PowerPoint, the teacher's PowerPoint about Tasman, the teachers mentioned that Māori also died. When you read in the history books about Tasman, it often doesn't mention that Māori people died. It just says that the natives and the savages all killed the Tasman's crew, and it says that, but it doesn't actually mention that the Māori people got hurt and killed and they didn't feature in the story because they are sort of invisibilised. So in this PowerPoint they exist, and in another PowerPoint on Cook, Māori have discovered Aotearoa when Cook visits. So that was evident in the teachers' resources. So then next we designed a Ruth Lemon design, and Ruth Lemon is actually the person who's at the back filming, and she has edited all the 6 books over the 4 years, so she's done a magnificent job in the creation, and the CPR wouldn't exist without Ruth. So she set up a website for educators or anyone to contact us. You can go to the website, and then I've designed this PD package that educators schools can utilise. So the school can hire me, and then they commit, they buy the books, they read them over a period of time. It might say 2 years or something. They might read the 6 books over 2 years, and then they work out a time period to teach the material. Here's an example. That Board of Trustees can also commit to reading the books to update their own information and inform their decisions better as well. And then schools might, as I said, commit reading the material over 2 or 3 years and then teach them. So basically the 2011 ERO research, ERO is the educational people who appraise all educators about what they do teaching and institutions in the country, and their research confirmed that the New Zealand, this treaty principle that I talked to you about at the beginning of the lecture tonight, is still the least enacted in this country of all the principles in the curriculum. So basically, we're still not managing to meet the one thing called the treaty of all of our institutions in this country of trying to meet this sort of treaty obligations. We're still not managing to do it. These sort of potentially revolutionary educational policies like kakitea and tātai-ako, which are policies that have been designed to try and help teachers to teach treaty obligations, are progressing at far too slow a rate that is needed for success to occur. So Māori achievement is still not at equitable levels in the country. So we know schools and educators are still not managing to do these things. And basically I'm suggesting that we will not see any changes in inequities in education or in the education system or in Māori achievement or meet the potential of, say, treaty policies, because educators cannot successfully enact a treaty principles until we address a current teacher lack of critical historical knowledge, accurate knowledge, historical knowledge, as well as some Māori knowledge, and as well as some knowledge about the treaty, and also some knowledge about being Pākehā as well, or some conversations about that. And then also to give teachers some new ways of talking about this, and give some teachers some new pedagogies about how to teach this. One treaty educationalist, her name is Ingrid Huggins, she has been a treaty educator for 30 years. She said if any people in this country are serious about trying to enhance the statistics of Māori people in this country, then the one thing that we need to attend to is the ignorance that's inside our institutions. in particular in relation to the standard story, the colonial kind of version of story of history that's still out there. The CPR, the curriculum program resource that I've written, is not a happy ever after. It's not a solution or any, winning thing to Māori and Pākehā kind of problems, because that answer doesn't really exist. We don't need to. What we need to do is to keep being committed to stay in relationship with each other without forcing one way on the other as if it's superior. But the CPR is an offering to the country and to educators to try and have to more effectively meet our treaty obligations, and hopefully to have more informed conversations in our educational spaces and in all our spaces about things that we haven't had to date and yet are entirely possible to occur. Our children and educators need to actually know these stories. They need to know the hard ones and they need to know the great ones. You don't fall over when you find out the hard ones. I didn't die when I found out all that information. And so all the people that I've, do practice the work, they haven't fallen over and died yet. So we know that the sky will not fall in if we find this information out. In order to honour the visions in the treaty, we need to know our stories, all of them. So if the CPR is done properly, it will go a long way to meet treaty obligations, because you're developing in people, Māori will use, European Pākehā will use what happened when they met, the actual treaty obligations, and then what happened afterwards. And when people read the material, they can't help but be transformed by it because they're reading accurate information. And then they understand a little bit about what's happened in this country and why, and then they understand why they don't know and why that's not their fault, but why they understand why we need to know now about more accurate histories. And then that impacts on how they think and feel and plan for teachers planning, and then that impacts on how the children learn, which would be all these policies would be able to be more enacted more effectively than currently we are managing to do. That's coming to the end of my kōrero. Just a little bit about how we didn't have any funding to do this work. It took 4 years part-time to read and write it. Over that time, I went and saw the Ministry of Education about seeking funding to help me write it, and they said that their position was that they don't fund curriculum writing and to go private, and so I didn't agree with them. But so what we did is we put a mortgage on the house to pay myself a wage to write the material. And that's how we've done it, and we both work part-time at uni. So we set up a Give a Little page, and if you have any, you can contact us if you want to buy a set of books. But there are, as I said, there's sets in the library, and we're trying to get it out to schools and early childhood centres, and obviously having talks like this is really fantastic because you're getting it out to the public, which is awesome. Instead of locked in the shed at home, in my shed at home, where the books are. So if anyone has any contacts with the Ministry of Education, please tell them about us, because I don't, if you've heard the new, Bella said at the beginning that, one school's took a petition to ask the ministry to say, can we please include the New Zealand Wars in our history teaching, and her response, the minister's response was no, because they don't dictate they don't want to dictate what teachers teach. But with history, if you don't actually teach your nation, your histories, you have no national identity. People don't know who they are, and can't participate in that as active citizens if they don't know this information. So it's pretty important to be teaching it. And so, yeah, that's their kind of position. The CPR is deliberately written in that it does dictate what teachers read, but it doesn't dictate what teachers teach. So basically it aligns with the ministry and tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for listening, and I think we're going to open up for any comments or questions and feedback. And
Kia ora. Hi. Just thinking of introducing the idea of using your resource, thinking of my grandchildren's school.
yes.
Is that website, the Critical Histories website?
Yes.
Like how would I approach that task of saying this school, which is a Catholic school?
You can go and find out. We've got cards here, there on the back of the table. Please take one. If you've got any school that you think might be interested, you could go and read the website first so you get a bit of a background information, and also you can email me, and I have a letter here that we send to schools, and we have one that we send to schools, and it explains what we do, and then the schools can contact us. So yeah, at the moment we're really getting only doing about one school every 2 months, which is crazy. It could be, if the ministry paid us, we could be doing this, going into schools every, all the time, and getting across the whole country over a few years. So yeah.
You've just finished doing this, so it's hard to ask, but I'm wondering whether the books will also be presented in such a way that they could be read as history rather than read as a curriculum guide.
Well, if someone paid us to do that, we can absolutely do it, yes. If you're wanting to read a really good, just a basic beginner's guide, Ranginui Walker's book, Ka Whawhai Tonu Mātou, is probably really fantastic kind of collection does the same timeline. It goes from the origin story right through till very recently, and it's more adult, and it's not academic.
Right.
It's not hard. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Of course, they're in the library.
Are you still teaching in Central?
No.
No.
Yes, I couldn't manage doing all of it. So I got burnt out after 25 years teaching. I got very burnt out of teaching. So I went to do this and teachers training.
So you were able to convey this to teachers training?
I do this in some courses, but not. It's not in kind of complete compulsory courses yet. No, it isn't. So it's very early days. So it would be awesome to have. Basically, we've still got all the techniques that I'm training at the moment. They're coming out with they do not have this knowledge. Most people. And so, how do we teach them as well as all the ones who are still out there in practice as well? Yes, I've got ideas about that. And about, speaking at a conference about it later this year, but, And it's also about educating the staff at the teacher training institution, because they also don't know. Actually, in the resource, even John Key in 2014, he said something like, in his knowledge of histories in this country that have been settled peacefully. And all the historians were just sitting there going, this person hasn't read, and he's our Prime Minister, he doesn't know basic accurate Māori.
But even the traditional story tells you that that's not true.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
The Maori
Yes,
Wars.
that's
I mean,
right.
what about
That's
them?
right. That's right.